Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor now to go ahead and introduce our panel. Our panel for the space race discussion is going to be Barbara Honegger, who worked in the Reagan White House, and just told me that one of her responsibilities when she was there was her portfolio included NASA.
And I'm the whiz kid that for the space race that I was.
And Judyth is the whiz kid about the space race, which I'm going to be learning this firsthand. I don't know this. So I am looking forward to hearing their presentation. If you would please give them a round of applause. Judyth Berry Baker and Barbara Honegger. We were supposed to. He's not here. He's not here.
It's a long story.
Oh, okay. Give me just 1 moment, please. I need to find something.
The person who's not here is not feeling very well.
Oh.
Yes, forgive me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was afraid I didn't want to disconnect this. It doesn't quite read. There we go. Thank you.
This? Turn it on? Very good. Okay, are we up? We're up. I never know. All right, so I'm Barbara Honegger, and I gave a presentation earlier. I guess that was 2 days ago now. Time flies. I'm going to share with you the beginnings of my research on an incredibly important subject that I'm seeing a bit through a glass darkly, but it's getting a lot clearer. And believe it or not, I believe that you're about to see some really critical links between the Apollo 11, or the Apollo moon landing program, and the assassination of President Kennedy. I got onto this quest, which is ongoing, it's a work in progress, with finding this photograph on the web one day. How many of you know that Hitler's first deputy Führer, the man who originally, if something happened to Adolf Hitler, was going to take his place as the leader of the Nazi Germany in World War II, Rudolf Hess. We're going to see a little bit about his life here, but when he was captured by the Allies and put in Spandau prison, he focused all of his attention on the space program, and in particular the moon. And this is a photograph of Rudolf Hess. Towards the end of his life, he died there at the age of 92, and that's Rudolf Hess in his prison cell, solitary confinement in Spandau prison, with the photographs of the moon behind him on the wall. And that's, when I saw that, I thought, what? And it started me on the quest of what you're now going to see. So we're just going to go a little bit of a deep dive into the Apollo lunar program. That's the cover of a newspaper, front page. We choose to go to the moon. That's President Kennedy's famous speech. And I want to remind you of the Apollo 11 patch for the, it was June 20th, 1969, finally landing on the moon. And I'm not going to go into the claims that we didn't actually land on the moon. I'm going to assume that we did for this presentation. That would be another presentation. But the official story is that we landed on the moon, which I do believe, having held the NASA portfolio in the Reagan White House, and have met and interviewed a number of the astronauts who actually claim to have walked on the moon, and after 2 hours of videotaped interviews with them at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I was a senior military affairs journalist for almost 2 decades, yes, I do believe certainly that we did land on the moon. But this is the Apollo 11 patch, and notice that it is the image of the Eagle landing. Now, the Eagle was the lunar lander for the Apollo 11, the most historic mission. These are the Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and the others, whom you recognize taking a picture there at NASA with a mock-up of the moon. The goal of the Apollo lunar program was to land on the moon, and as you may remember, at 4:18 p.m. on, not June, but July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong's voice crackled from the speakers over NASA's mission control in Houston, Texas. Right here in Texas, the Eagle has landed at that very moment. And with those words, the goal of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's famous 1961 speech of putting a man on the moon and bringing him back safely, I underline that, as you'll see at the end of my presentation, by the end of that decade, was made into reality. This is a grainy photograph, a still capture from the moment of the landing, of the stepping down onto the lunar surface. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, that famous imprint in the lunar soil. And of course, this was the ultimate culmination of the Nazi rocket program. This is a photograph of Wernher von Braun, who was Hitler's top rocket engineer in World War II. He was brought to the United States in Project Paperclip, and he is the father of the U.S. space program. This is a photograph of von Braun. There are many, many on the internet with Nazi officers during World War II. This is President Kennedy, probably at what's now Kennedy Space Center in Florida with von Braun. It's probably one of the Saturn rockets. This is a photograph, interestingly, given what happened in Dealey Plaza in 1963, of President Kennedy with Wernher von Braun in a similar motorcade. So now we're back to this photograph of Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's original deputy Führer in Landau prison. And we're going to get a little bit of background about Hess, which will lead us into the links that I believe are very strong to the JFK assassination. This is a photograph just to prove to you that Hess was deputy Führer. This is early in after Hitler rose to power. That's, of course, Hitler on your left and Hess on the right. Hess was a very, very important person to Adolf Hitler. They effectively wrote Mein Kampf together in Landsberg prison after they were arrested after the beer hall putsch. That is Hitler on the left in the prison, and Rudolf Hess second from the right. It looks like that slide's cut off. I apologize for that. But this is a photograph of Hess. He was an ace pilot, one of Hitler's ace pilots. And this is taken just before his very mysterious to this day, highly classified to this day, secret mission to Britain, which the official story that you read in the history books will tell you was for the secret purpose in Hess's mind, which he claimed Hitler didn't know anything about, and Hess claimed Hitler knew, but Hitler claimed Hess was crazy and that he didn't know, that he allegedly undertook to try to cut a secret alliance with Britain. This was in 1941. I want to remind you of the two top symbols of Nazi Germany were the Nazi eagle. Remember, the eagle has landed, and the swastika. The secret documents that Hess brought with him in his briefcase, of course, was taken. He crash-landed in Scotland. He was an ace pilot, but there was bad weather. He crash-landed. Those documents were sealed, and they were supposed to be released only 2 years ago. When the seal was broken in 1991 to 92, towards the end, the briefcase was empty. That's the official claim. On the day of Hess's flight, May 10th of 1941, the Nazis bombed London in the heaviest blitzkrieg attack of the war, which Hess knew about in advance and, we believe, planned and used as cover for his mission, because the British were otherwise occupied, resisting the attack. Almost 1,500 were killed, 12,000 remained homeless, and the Houses of Parliament were bombed, and the Commons debating chamber, the symbol of British democracy, was destroyed. This is a very important book. There are many books on Adolf Hess. There are many books on Rudolf Hess, This one is one of the most important. It's by Lieutenant Colonel Eugene Byrd, spelled B-I-R-D, who is the U.S. side commandant of Spandau Prison, where Hess was imprisoned for decades and decades until he died at the age of 92. He was the commandant from 64 to 72. He wrote a book. He violated all of Allied policy. Allied policy, once Hess was released by Britain and put in Spandau Prison after the war, Hess was found guilty at the Nuremberg trials, and he was put in Spandau Prison. And the Allied policy was that he had to be in solitary confinement, and that any of the prison guards, the commandant, no one was to communicate with him. But Lieutenant Colonel Eugene Byrd violated that policy, became friends with Hess, and spent hundreds of hours interviewing him and wrote this book. And it was, so in Colonel Byrd's book, this is a quote. Colonel Eugene Byrd, I'm adding Colonel Eugene Byrd, they were walking in the Spandau prison garden one day, and the moon was still hanging in the sky. It was at night. Hess pointed up and said, "Colonel Byrd, is it really true that the Americans have landed a man on the moon?" This is, of course, after July 20th, 1969. Hess, after that, was given the moon charts that you saw and details of the moon landing, which hung on the walls, and that was almost certainly by Byrd himself. Byrd also facilitated Hess's secret communications and, by policy, illegal communications with top officials in the U.S. space program, and we can infer that that was with Wernher von Braun himself. And that was for years and years. Again, the photograph of Hess in Spandau Prison. Byrd's book was based, as I mentioned, on hundreds of hours. All right. So when the Allies found out that Byrd had violated that policy and had been talking to Hess, that he had a manuscript and was proposing to publish it as a book, he was arrested, interrogated, put under house arrest, and forced to resign his position as commandant of the prison. So what did Hess know that was so dangerous to Winston Churchill and the Allies and the official story of World War II? And I would add the official story of the Kennedy assassination. At the Nuremberg Military Tribunal, Hess's defense counsel asked that a psychiatrist from neutral Switzerland should examine Hess to determine his mental fitness to stand trial, which was a prerequisite for doing so. The request was denied by the judge. Psychiatrists from all four of the Allied victors then examined Hess, 8 total doctors. 7 of the 8 agreed he was perfectly fit to stand trial, that he was sane, knew what he was doing. The 8th was the personal doctor of Winston Churchill, Lord Moran, who didn't want Hess to stand trial at all because they were afraid of what he would say, of what he knew and what he would say, especially about his secret mission to Britain. They failed. The judge did not rule for that, but instead he was put in Spandau prison for the rest of his life. Eventually, for decades at the end of his life, the only prisoner in this huge prison that was designed to hold up to 600 prisoners. Do you think this is a coincidence, knowing what you now know? On July 20th of 2001, just a few years ago, which was the Apollo 11 moon landing, the Eagle has landed anniversary, Hess's remains were exhumed. They were cremated and strewn at sea along with the remains of his wife and parents. I don't think that date is coincidental. So as I mentioned, Hess's mission, according to the official story, which I believe is true, was to attempt to negotiate a secret alliance with Britain so that Hitler could focus on the Soviet Union, invading the Soviet Union. During the war, JFK's father and then U.S. Ambassador to Britain, Joseph Kennedy, was involved, according to documents, books, in secret contacts with, quote, Hitler's emissaries, who were attempting to do exactly what Hess's mission was for, to negotiate an attempted secret peace and alliance between Germany and Britain. So my question is, focus of future research, was one of these emissaries, in fact, why not, Rudolf Hess, who had landed in Scotland, his plane had crashed, he was taken prisoner, put in a prison in Britain, presumably in London, and I believe that he met with JFK's father. Senator Robert Taft condemned the Nuremberg trials as victor's justice, in which the winners were both the prosecutors and the judges. And in then Senator, future President John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, applauded Taft's stand in that regard. Many people don't know this, but when JFK's diaries were published, that's the next slide. Anyone who wants my PowerPoint slides there, it's all over the internet, but when Kennedy's diaries were made available, I believe they were auctioned off, this quote came out of his diary, which is quite shocking to me. Adolf Hitler is one of the greatest men. The old trust him, the young idolize him. It is the worship of a national hero who had served his country. Within a few years, Hitler will emerge from the hatred which surrounds him as one of the most significant figures who ever lived, unquote. So there's a special relationship, at least at that time in his life, between JFK and the Nazis, and in particular, the space program. So now we're getting to the nub of it. Links to the assassination, in my opinion, so far. We know that JFK had secret communications with Khrushchev. There are claims that he actually had given Khrushchev classified information. This was in one of the previous presentations here at this conference. JFK wanted to make the Apollo moon landing program into a joint U.S.-Soviet mission. All of these infuriated the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which was headed then by General Lyman Lemnitzer, and I talked about him in my presentation yesterday. Hess, Antarctica, and the secret U.S. Nazi space program. At the Hydrographic Institute in Hamburg, Germany, are thousands of aerial photographs, secretly taken at the time, of Nazi bases in Antarctica, constructed under Hitler's Richter, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Richter expedition, which was under the oversight and protection of the Hitler's Air Force head, Admiral Goering. Rudolf Hess was that project's liaison, Goering's liaison to that very project in Antarctica. Hitler's secret Antarctica projects, whatever they were, either went dark or were stopped or ended in 1938. Now, this last claim, I'm not certain is true. I'm going to do my best to check it out, but it has been claimed. The day before the JFK assassination, the Pentagon's CIA liaison, Air Force Colonel Fletcher Prouty, the author of The Secret Team, he's very well known to all of us, who was the real Mr. X in Oliver Stone's movie JFK, according to some claims, was sent to Antarctica. Now, what I read before reading this was that he was in either New Zealand or Australia, I think New Zealand, where he read the headline that had already been printed and published before the actual shooting with headlines about the shooting. But it may be that's in the same neck of the woods. He may have gone on to Antarctica, or first gone to Antarctica and then gone to Australia or New Zealand. Admiral Byrd's Antarctica mission was, of course, a follow-up by the United States. It included secret photographs of overflights, presumably of what the Nazis had been doing up to 1938. Byrd's private diary was forbidden to be published by U.S. authorities, but its contents were leaked by his son, who himself came to a very bad and very strange end. Before I make a surprise announcement here, I'd just like you to know that I've gone public with this big time on this radio show that now reaches about 140 countries. It's called The Other Side of Midnight. It was this show, and if you get my PowerPoint slides or email me, you'll be able to get this link, and the entire interview, the audio file is online, along with all of the photographs, many of them in the slide presentation at the bottom under that link. So the last slide before my surprise announcement is when I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School, which was for 16 years, my position was the senior military affairs journalist, and that's also known as NPS. The DoD's official designation for the Naval Postgraduate School, where I was a senior journalist for almost 2 decades, is, to this day, DOD's premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university. It was in that position as senior military affairs journalist that one day a man came into our public affairs office and yelled out with military bearing and a booming voice, "I need a writer." And the public affairs officer, as I was the writer, escorted him into my office. He closed the door. He said, "For 30 years, my lips have been zipped. I can finally tell my story." And the bottom line is his name was Navy Captain Sam Houston, related to the famous Sam Houston here in Texas. I don't believe he's still alive. I think he recently died. He was quite elderly when he came into my office. And this was, I believe, just calculate 30 years, 69, so what, that would have been 99, wouldn't it? Anyway, he came into my office at the actual 30-year deadline where he could finally talk. And he said, "I am the man who saved Neil Armstrong and the Apollo 11 astronauts from certain death upon splashdown by changing the location at effectively the 11th minute or the 11th hour where it was going to splash down." Captain Houston was the Navy's weatherman. He had just been made the Navy's top weatherman at Pearl Harbor, and he decided that it was a few days before the lunar return from the moon of Apollo 11, and he thought, "I'd better just check," because the splashdown location within a mile or two off, plus or minus, was predetermined, and he knew what it was, so he went to that GPS location and he looked to see what the weather was, and there was what's called a Screaming Eagle formation, which is a vertical hurricane up to 250 miles an hour forming right over the splashdown site. And it's an amazing story that you simply have to read. Even though I wrote it, it gives me chills every time I read it, and the bottom line is they would have died for sure. That Screaming Eagle vertical hurricane would have torn apart their parachutes, and they would have crash landed in the ocean and all died. It would have been a horrible ending to the mission if not for Navy Captain Sam Houston. He was given the Navy Medal of Honor by Admiral Limnitzer, but that was also, that certificate which he showed me, was given to him secret. He couldn't even show that for 30 years. And I was probably the first person, except maybe his wife, who saw it after 30 years. So you really need to read this to understand the rest of the story of the Apollo mission. Now, I have a very quick surprise announcement. And I'm going to turn over the microphone to a very important person. Are you ready? I'm going to turn the microphone over to this very important person. I'm going to let her tell you. I'm not going to introduce her because I'm going to let her let you know what she wants you to know about her. And this is very important, explosive information about what I've been talking about.
Thank you, Barbara. My name is Chana, C-H-A-N-A, like Charlie Chan, Spainhour Willis. And my father was F.P. Spainhour, go to Spain for an hour. His grandmother was Myrtle Houston, and our family is in Dallas County back to the 1850s. My dad was Master Chief, United States Navy. I spoke 3 years ago, and I haven't since, in 2016, thanks to my finding Judyth and realizing we had a lot of things in common. I have since been to some conferences and read more material and discovered more things about my father's life. In a nutshell, you're welcome to call me, visit with me. My email is real easy to remember, Chana, C-H-A-N-A, Gail Willis @gmail.com. My father was born in 1923 and died in 2014. The December before he died, he said, "I want one more debriefing." He was Naval Intelligence, CIA. He was joined the Navy in 1941. He was in Tulagi Bay with Kennedy. There's a backstory there about breaking his hand with him. This was before PT 109. After the war, he came back to SMU for 2 semesters. He went back in the Navy. At that point, he got into photo intelligence. His Aunt Ruby Houston, my grandmother's sister-in-law, worked for R.L. Thornton for 50 years at Mercantile National Bank. If you do your research, you'll see that Oral Thornton may have been Clint Murchison's house not for the assassination. Daddy told me he never thought I was listening to his stories when I was growing up, and I pieced it together. He was supposed to take it to the grave. I thought I was alone till I met people like Judyth and E. Howard Hunt and Gary Powers Jr., Beverly Oliver, and it's like getting into a wreck in an intersection. And all these wonderful researchers, Robert Groden, and I can't even tell you the people that I've met. You're standing on an intersection, you see a wreck, and you have a viewpoint, and you have the logistics, the statistics, and ballistics. I didn't understand. I led a sheltered life. I was led to be paranoid and observant and be careful. And I was in the car. A coin has two sides. You have these conspiracy theorists and you have these lone nutters. Coin has three sides. There's an edge. And some of us were in the car and I was afraid to speak. But basically the bottom nutshell is my father was involved before, during, after the assassination. He went, in 1949, he was at the War Tribunal crime hearings and hangings and photographed those items and feared people seeing that photograph and knowing about that more than the JFK involvement. In the 50s, because he knew how to type, I have all his security clearances, the long tails. He used to tell me I never believed him. They were going to make a trip to the Antarctic, and he was on the same floor in Washington with Admiral Byrd. Privately, he called him Dickie Byrd. Admiral Byrd's cousin was Harold T. Byrd that owned the school book depository. They did not get along, and Harold wouldn't fund any money for this expedition. So Admiral Byrd went to the National Science Foundation, Life magazine, National Geographic, Fritz Goro took Dad's picture, and Walt Disney. I thought Dad was one of these guys like a beautiful mind where he believed he did things and really didn't. It's the exact opposite. He did things and did not want to talk about them. Little girl, if you know, you're not going to live very long if you tell. And before his death, he said, I need my last debriefing. The Dallas FBI office will not help us. And I know I take great risk to my family still talking about this, but my mother's okay with it. My family's okay with it, and we need to spread sunshine on it. Lee was on my dad's team. Lee was O&I. Lee and Judyth was told the same thing my dad was told. If you don't finish this, you're dead, your wife's dead, and your kids are dead. When I figured it out when I was 14, processing, learning how to cut out pictures when he was chief photographer of the Dallas Fire Department, and how to cut a roof burning out and then make a new negative with firefighters on the grassy in front of the house after it had burned, looked like they were eating sandwiches while the house was burning. That photo lab was right underneath where Ruby shot Oswald. When he left the Navy after Naval Intelligence, why would they send him to Naval Intelligence School at the end of his career in 1959? I was born in 1960 in Jacksonville, Florida. Why? Dad was doing photo recon in VAPE 62, if you want to write that down. That was where he made lenses. These satellites, you look at your GPS, he made a lot of those lenses. He said, I can't believe I had anything to do with it. He figured out how to weigh the camera and make a rail system. So when the pilots in the U-2 planes flew over someplace, he computed the speed, the altitude, the humidity to get clear pictures from 70,000 feet. Why did we fly into Russia? His back went out in an airplane crash, second day on the ice, when he went down there with the first group of guys that ever wintered over in the Antarctic. How do I know all this? I have copies of his orders. He was photographed. I have boxes and boxes of pictures. He dies. I try to give them back to Naval Intelligence. Come get them. They won't mail them to us. No, come get them. They never did. Okay, so I'm going to talk. Dad was a part of our country. He was a patriot. He loved our country. He did what he perceived was his duty. And then when he realized what was going on in Dallas, a few days ahead of time, one person on his team committed suicide and another went crazy. When it was over with, everyone was disbanded. He begged to stay here. He said, I can't do this anymore. I got a wife. He met Mom. He was a bachelor 35 years. Mom was 21. They got knocked up. They were married 56 years. God love them. And a beautiful lady. And he said, my family's from Dallas. My parents are here. No one will know or care. And they forgot about him when he was 88 and got stomach cancer. And he said, I want my last debriefing so I can die in peace. And I talked to my congressman because Dad lost his handler. And the congressman told us to call Dallas. That wouldn't help me or the congressman. So that congressman had to go all the way back to Washington. I said, Dad's not going to talk to anybody unless, you put a monkey in a suit, he's not going to talk to anybody unless they know his code name. In May of 2014, he got it. And he died on August 25th, 2014. I gave a couple of speeches, and I've talked about his time in the Antarctic. And Dad explained to me that we needed a space program, and it's on record publicly, if you dig, for science and defense of our country to keep us free. Our government, I believe and love America. We have left wing and right wing. They want us fighting amongst each other, and it flies the same damn bird of liberty that we should all be getting along. And my dad said, you needed 3 places to triangular point. NASA in Florida, NASA in Texas, and the Antarctic, the hardest place in the world for terrorists to get to. And they spent 20 years putting satellites around the world for science and defense. In the spring of '63, Dad was on the USS Enterprise with John McCain, a junior grade lieutenant. And 2 Russian MiGs flew over the deck of the Enterprise, 300 feet over it. At that point, commanders got hold of Washington and said, they know we're still in Cuban waters and we know they're still there. And they became very concerned. Things started cascading at that point. And I asked Dad, he said, I can't talk in the house. I asked him questions. He said yes or no. And I said, can you just tell me who was behind it, the ultimate kingpin person who was behind it? And he said, LBJ. I asked him if Lee was there that day, and he said, yes, he was on my team. I said, did he handle the gun? He said, no. He did not ever fire a gun that day. He handled one, but never not. And the agreement was whoever got caught would go down and be the patsy. And then you go back and look at pictures of Lee Oswald's face and his confidence and his defiance. And even after he got shot, he wouldn't say, because he cared about his wife and kids.
And me.
And Judyth. I've been told there's no coincidence that 4 weeks after I spoke the first time, there's a man by the name of John Pope that's good friends with George Bush Sr. that bailed UT University out of their financial crisis in the turn of the 1900s. His son is a judge on the coast of Port Aransas. His son was a famous home builder who hit a kid that was 26 years old and left him in a field for 13 hours till that body was found. That man spent that time washing that kid off his windshield. The kid had 2 kids and 1 on the way. That was my stepson, and that was 4 weeks after I spoke the first time. I have skin in this game, and I love America. I don't know what will happen to me or my family when I come public, but I know the truth. I believe my dad. I believe Judyth. I've got too much documentation, and whoever's listening, know it's not in my home. It's in 12 different places. If something happens to me, it all goes public, and I love you guys, and God bless America.
I just want to close the circle. I'm going to ask a quick question because it's a very important answer. I think you asked your dad, what is the ultimate top reason that JFK was killed? And he said?
What's that mean, Daddy? Them satellites. And what's in those satellites to keep us free? And the fear of how the fight in Washington over who was making the policy on how that was to be used, the president versus the military and the agencies. Thank you.
Yeah, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lemnitzer, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the whole national security apparatus didn't trust Kennedy, according to her father, with that information any longer. And just to close one more loop, and I'll hand it over to Judyth, is you heard that the is it the owner of the school book depository, Byrd? The owner?
His cousin, Admiral Byrd's cousin.
Yeah, it was Admiral Byrd's cousin, the Admiral Byrd, who followed up the mission in Antarctica, the secret mission in Antarctica that Rudolf Hess was Goering's personal liaison to. Then Admiral Byrd was the U.S. follow-up of that, overflights, and to my understanding, she told me last night that her father did those photographs, processed those photographs from the Admiral Byrd's first mission, the overflights of what the Nazis had been doing earlier. And also, let me just remind you that there was a Colonel Byrd, who was the commandant of Spandau Prison, who interviewed, I believe he's related, I'm looking into it, I believe that all these Byrds are related to one another, the man who spent hundreds of hours interviewing Hess against Allied policy in Spandau Prison and was arrested and interrogated and removed from his position because of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody. Oops. Can you hear me from this?
Judith, how much time do you want us to give you?
Half an hour at least.
Raise your hand when you're sick of me, okay? I think can you hear me from this? All right. All right. Okay, I'm going to talk to you today about why, for example, I was trained to speak Russian. People have asked me that, and it's a good question. In the late 1950s, and we're going to start with this, the United States, on October 4th, 1957, an auto-sized moon was orbited by the Soviets. I was, at this time, 14 years old, I think. And it said, will the new satellite return? If we could hear it beep, 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 we could see it in the sky. It was so low. You know, it didn't stay up there as long as you might think. It crashed eventually. But Vanguard, we put up a 6.4-inch diameter, 3 1/4 pound satellite. Okay? And Explorer, which was 6 feet 8 inches long, weighed 31 pounds. Oh, we did that too. The Soviets put up something that weighed 2,925 pounds, 11 feet tall and 8 inches. That's what happened to us in 1957. Shocked. Everyone was shocked. Well, they shouldn't have been, and I'm going to show you why. But what this did, it sent terror through many civilian lives. What is Russia up to? How can they do this? How come we're not first? What happened? Before I knew it, because I had been given an IQ test, and some of the others had been on the new Wechsler 2 and all that kind of thing. I think, yeah, it was Wechsler 2, I think. We found ourselves kind of targeted. We were the whiz kids. We were the ones that had 150, 160 IQ or higher. And we were given a lot of attention. We were given opportunities to go to international science fairs and meet others like us. And especially CIA was interested. OSS, CIA, okay, became the CIA. A lot of people don't know that Dr. Alton Oxner's, one of his best friends was Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, who brought in the CIA. These people are all so close together. And when they're going to work on an internationally important project, I mean, Oxner knew so much, and people don't understand that unless you go look at the connections. All these years, Oxner was not mentioned as involved in the Kennedy assassination, except a couple little articles that Jim Garrison had tried to indict him. And we have in Surgeon of the South, we have Oxner stating he was afraid. Surgeon of the South is actually the official biography of Alton Oxner, where he says he was afraid that Garrison was going to arrest him. along with the people at a coffee company. How about that? But there were forces against Garrison. It included Carlos Marcello. And if you're going to live in the same town with Marcello, you better get along with him. There are things that Garrison could not do, places Garrison could not go. But we're talking about the space race. I've been asked many times, how come you knew any Russian, you could speak Russian? Because these frantic people gave us opportunities to learn Russian. We took courses. You know, you might read a, what? We're going to meet a Russian spy? In my case, I was a speed reader, 2,500 words a minute, and they wanted me to speed read in Russian. They wanted me to look at the cancer articles that had been published in Russian. So I was able to read Russian a heck of a lot better than I could speak it. And Lee, when I first met him, he said, well, you sort of know Russian, because my accent was terrible. It still is. And I've forgotten, because of 3 concussions I've received in so-called accidents, I no longer can speak all the languages I could, which were French and Italian and Russian and so on. But one of the things that really struck me was how much attention we got. I can't tell you how many IQ tests they gave us, because we were scattered around. You've got Robert Strom and others. I mentioned him because we were at the International Science Fair together across from each other, and the military officers there had actually, I had written a poem, oh, precious dear fair lady, to thee do we give our love, for you are the flag of the United States streaming on high above. So that was it was a poem, and we had, McKinley Cantor had written was writing the biography. Can anyone in the audience here know some of the military enemies of John F. Kennedy? Come on, name one. General? What, all right. There you go. It's LeMay, Curtis LeMay. His biography was being written by McKinley Cantor, and you will see in my newspaper, high school newspaper articles, McKinley Cantor came to our high school. He and I became friends because they kind of showed me off to him. He said, she writes poetry, and look at this nice poem, and, you know, and she wants to be a writer. And so I walked around, and McKinley Cantor, he wrote Andersonville. He wrote the biography of Curtis LeMay. Why is this important? He sent my poem to Curtis LeMay. And when I was at International Science Fair, and these military officers came by, oh yeah, they said, we remember your poem. Nice patriotic girl. Unfortunately, the more patriotic you are and you're in that situation, it gave me a little bit of attention that I wish I had never had. And it was the beginning of my being able to get all kinds of equipment and everything else from that point. Because you had all these retired military officers. Look it up in Sarasota, Florida. There they are. And where's my house? We're about 15 blocks from Sarasota's city line, you know. I'm going to Manatee High School. Okay, so here I am, and I'm now it said, you know, you are the hope of the future, all of you kids. You're whiz kids. They called us whiz kids. And Robert, for example, Robert Strom ended up with IBM, one of the great brains behind IBM and all that they have accomplished. I'm going to go now and tell you the condition. I've got these various, when I give you information, I back it up. I've got the documents. I was saving these from the time that they were interested in me. So I started cutting them out, you know. Now I'm saying they, I don't know who they were. I kept getting, I was being sent chemicals from Walter Reed, Army Medical Center, after we had a Canute Mickelson, who I was introduced to, came to our school and became a friend of mine. Who was he? He had been a spy against Hitler, and his own family disowned him, thinking that he was one of those, associated with Hitler. He was a specialist in radiation and genetic alterations. It was going to it's right in my high school newspaper. He was going on to a seminar on radiobiology, okay? And when you see in my book, me and Lee, you will see when I'm at Roswell Park Institute, they actually put me on there's my picture with 5 other people that were in the program. And there were more in the program, but we were the top ones, so they would put us together. And there you'll see it, they asked me what I'm studying, and it says radiobiology. Now, when we talk about Dr. Mary's monkey, and we talk about my book and what we were doing, it is loaded with information about radiobiology. I can trace for you right from Mickelson on the work that I was, given more. When I couldn't get the doctors locally who had been trained to get this, they were trained at Oak Ridge. I had 2 doctors working with me, trained at Oak Ridge, and it says in preclinical. Do you know what preclinical means? In preclinical.
Before you have a disease?
No, it means you're working with test tubes. You're growing stuff, okay? Preclinical biology. So I was learning from them. They had just taken these courses, and you can see on the record, it's in my book, that along with these doctors from Bradenton, Florida, you can see that Bradenton, little town right next to, at that time little, next to Sarasota, you can see Dr. Brown from the CIA also taking these courses. And I don't know how many more of you. By the way, since I put this up in my book and everything and loaded it, these have disappeared from the internet. No, of course. But it's too late because it got everywhere. So we're talking about, what I'm saying here, on where did that go? October 1957. 57. What do we have going on then? Oh, we've got to get ahead. We've got to go get ahead. Meanwhile, I'll give you a little anecdote. So I'm at the high school, and they say, we got to give you another test. And then this one I scored highest in the state of Florida. I'm sorry, I apologize for anybody who doesn't believe it. All right, I don't care. But the point is, it gets awfully boring. What they did was wrong, so they tested me again. And then I cheated. I went to Manatee Medical Library, and there was a new psychiatrist there that they had. And he let me look at the latest IQ test. I said, I just took this one. I said, I missed a question near the end. I said apocalypse instead of apocrypha. And he said, well, the answer was apocrypha. And a couple other answers that were at the end that gets you up to a genius IQ of 200, which I never had. Okay. Einstein. So the next time they threw that test at me again, like, is it going to change? Has it dwindled? Has it grown? I scored a 200, and wow, this is Einstein. And I said, look, I didn't say you creeps, but I felt like it. Please quit testing us. And these tests aren't that good. I get lost. I had to have a map for my own high school because I got lost all the time. You guys are testing intelligence, but guess what? I'm an absolutely lobotomized idiot when it comes to trying to figure out where I am. In this own hotel room. I've been here all these days. I had to go to the bathroom so bad, and I couldn't remember which direction was the bathroom in my own room. I have something missing in my head, and yet I'm supposed to be very smart, okay? But practically speaking, if I were back in the Stone Ages, I'd be dead. So much for high IQ, okay? So there are so many limitations. So I did that because I was trying to teach them. They stopped giving me the IQ tests after that because I said I cheated. You think I had an IQ of 200? I just looked the answers up. Do you think I'm, and who knows how many others had access to do something like that too, so they could get into college with a higher, because they were doing so much emphasis. But they were trying to figure out who was smart because the space race, they wanted to get the smart kids together. And you can't blame them. You really can't. If you think about Operation Paperclip, it brought everybody over. And by the way, as these scientists died, all of a sudden our abilities in science, now we're down to all kinds of things happening in Europe. Where are our new scientific developments and this, that, and the other? We're back to everybody else. And once you get the geniuses that were rescued out of Germany, they're dead now. I want to see fantastic things happening in our country, really fantastic like we had back then. I guess we have to get some more people that are persecuted to come over here and revitalize, because our education system will not produce these kind of people. And they're not. Absolutely not. Okay, so we have on February 1st, 1958, now I'm cutting these things out because I'm part of this. They're giving me all kinds of training, all these things are happening. And I wasn't the only one. At our school, we had what's called a science research seminar. We don't have that in school today. I had time every single day. I had an hour plus most of my lunchtime. We could eat a lunch when I could do research in my own high school. But my research got so dangerous. They installed black lights to kill germs. They got scared of what I was doing. And then they moved me into the stadium and got me out of the school altogether because what I was doing, when they saw these mice with these huge, their lungs were spreading out in their abdomen, all these tumors, and they smelled, their urine stank in a funny way and so on, they got terrified. On top of that, one student let them loose. And they were running all over the floor in the biology lab rooms with and the girls were screaming, and all that. And we were picking them up by the tail and pinning them back. And somebody saying, they got loose. And of course, my enemies posted many years later, how did she know which were which after they got loose? Guess what? We've got a newspaper article. I had dyed them pink, yellow, blue, and purple and white. So they were, even though they were all mixed up, we could soon put them all back to where they belong. Because I'm not going to, what if one of my high school friends pick up a mouse and put it in another one? They were all died. Okay, and they'd soon all be dead. So we died and dead. So I'm trying to say that I was very careful with what I'm doing, but people became frightened after they got loose. So they put me under the stadium. Part of was a dirt floor where the mice were kept. And we kept spraying, they would spray Clorox. They had people come in and bring in new sawdust all the time. And they went and put the sawdust in an incinerator. They were scared of what I was doing. So that's the situation at the time. Then when the doctors came to examine what I was doing there, we had Dr. Harold Deal, Vice President of the American Cancer Society. Remember, I crashed their seminar because even the doctors I was working with trained at Oak Ridge, as I said, in preclinical studies. When I was doing this with test tubes, when I got to working with real cancers in these mice, were germ-free mice, I got from Dr. Rainier. And people said, how did you get your stuff from Dr. Rainier? Well, I was born in South Bend, Indiana, and my parents were friends with a lot of people at Notre Dame, including professors and so on, because that's South Bend is Notre Dame. Rainier came from Notre Dame. When he saw what I was doing, he was in St. Petersburg, Florida. We have records that I stopped in St. Petersburg, Florida. We have records that I did an art exhibition for Research Incorporated that Rainier ran to give money to what was Rainier doing? Breeding germ-free mice. I had access to germ-free mice, and I'm 15. Okay? So I had a head start on some of this stuff. And I had access, when they saw what I was doing, they came to the high school. It was Dr. Robert Robinson, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Dr. Harold Urey, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Oh, why were they so interested? Because I went to International Fair not with my research, what I was doing on the mice, which I had with me at that time, but because I invented a new way to get magnesium out of seawater that was more efficient. And in fact, I won't name the company, but they said, we'll give you $150 instead of encyclopedia. Oh God, they gave me World Book Encyclopedia. Or we'll just take it and just adapt it a little, because we're not going to let you have the patent on this. We're here to steal, your stuff. They didn't mind if they said that to me because I was a minor and I didn't have adult rights and I could be lying. So they honestly just told me what they were going to do, this big company. So there I was, unable to protect what had happened. And I didn't want any money. I was just glad it would help our country because at that time we needed more magnesium faster for these satellites you're talking about. So when I talk about space race and getting this magnesium into the space, into these capsules and everything like that. So I've got a little bit of a investment in that to tell you about that now. So here's the situation. I'm a real girl too, so I had boyfriends, and, you know, I wanted to have a normal life, but it became almost impossible. So they come to the school with not only here these 2 Nobel Prize winners. By the way, in my school newspaper it says, Nobel Prize winners, you know, come to see my, you know, to visit with Judyth, you know, Judy. So, I mean, I've got all the records on that. Along with them was Dr. Harold Deal, the vice president of the American Cancer Society. His best friend, Dr. Alton Ochsner. Dr. Deal and Dr. Ochsner and Dr. Moore, George Moore, the 3 of them would crusade. They would go from place to place wherever they had lawsuits where people were dying from cancer, lung cancer, from smoking, and they were defending these smokers. They need compensation. You've got to, you know, they were crusading. They finally got their way to get warnings on cigarette packaging. But they were working together, these 3 doctors, and it was about, what did I give cancer to these mice? Lung cancer? They were talking about lung cancer. I gave lung cancer to these mice using cigarette products. Can you imagine how interested they were in me because of that? It's not illogical that all the special attention I got, because they verified that I gave lung cancer to these germ-free mice, pumping in this mixture. They had nothing else to breathe. In 7 days, they had lung cancer. In 14 days, it was killing them. Weanling mice, germ-free, and it had never been done before in the most expensive labs. And you know what they did? They said, don't you tell a word to anybody about this. And they shut it down. It was so dangerous because if you think you can give lung cancer just by changing genetic material, obviously we know now there was a virus, and they had to find out what that virus was that these mice carried that did that. I was sent, and it's all in the papers and everything. All of a sudden, all over, you know, they got attention. So I was in all the newspapers about 99 mice. Well, that started out with 99 mice, but guess what? We had a boy, and we had a lot more mice all the time. I had plenty of mice because they had babies. Lots of babies. I was breeding them on the side. But then I got rid of them all for the germ-free. So we had to sterilize everything. Why am I talking about all this? Are you bored? If you're bored, raise your hand, and I'll go on. It is a space race. We're talking about the interest that they had in people like me. And I say that there were others that they were interested in. As a girl, I had a little more freedom. I mean, there really was a prejudice against girls. For example, when I won the top physics and chemistry award at Florida, you know, it's a girl wins, you know. And they would not give me one of the great prizes was to spend a week on an aircraft carrier because I was female. So they wouldn't let me get on there. I wanted to do that so much. I wanted to see those Navy boys. Those boys in their uniform. And by the way, Lee Oswald, he had to walk with a military style that would make your heart stop. It was just built, and you could almost visualize the uniform he would wear. You could tell he was a Marine, even when he was in civies, okay? He just held that kind of composure and dignity. And you don't know any of that because you never knew him. All you get is pictures of the ugliest they could find, and they even deformed him. You know, blow him up and you see they put a smirk on his face when he was frowning. The only man in history who could smile and frown at the same time. Yeah. So we're going along here, and tell me when I'm running out of time. So by February 1st, 1958, we get something up there. Oh my gosh, what do we have? We have Explorer. Okay, it's 80 inches long, 6 inches in diameter, weighs 18 pounds. We're really going to town, aren't we? It's a serious space race. In fact, we are very far behind. But we're going to get a second moon up there. Okay, and that one's going to be a little bit heavier. Okay, we're near. Now, there is a very big problem. We're talking about space race. I want to tell you what's happening on the ground. Now, tell me if we had this situation today, what you might do. We're close to MacDill Air Force Base there at St. Petersburg. We're living right across the bridge. And it's Saturday, May 3rd, 58. Remember, I'm pulling these things out now because I feel, and that's why I have all these newspaper articles. I kept them. And what do we have going on? Listen to this. Skyway death plane was a B-47. All right, B-47 based at MacDill Air Force. Now, this is May 3rd, 58. We're trying to get up in space, and here's what our B-47 fleet was 2,000 B-47s protecting us. Listen to this. It says that it exploded. I want to ask you a question. How many times do planes explode? Well, are we looking at a Soviet or some kind of interference? I want to hear you read. I'm going to read the rest of this. This plane, May 3rd, 1958, exploded. It was a regular training flight, flying low at 800 feet, and 4 men died. But wait. The investigation failed to show the cause of the crash. On the same day the MacDill crash occurred, another B-47 crashed while taking off from Pease Air Force Base, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, also killing 4. Earlier this year, on March, which is just not very far away, 4 were killed again at MacDill, crashing at Avon Park while at a test bombing run. And on December, just a few, 6 months earlier, another MacDill B-47 exploded in midair over the Gulf of Mexico on a bombing run. 3 were killed. It is believed that more than 100 B-47s are stationed at MacDill. Now, if you have 4% of them crashing and exploding, what is going on? What kind of situation? If we had that today, there'd be a major investigation. They are killing our pilots, for heaven's sakes. The Air Force statement that they're going to have modified tests. They're going to make changes. It says the B-47 has been involved in 14 crashes since the beginning of this year. All right? 14 with 34 casualties. It's front page news, for Pete's sakes. And you don't hear about this. What kind of condition is our Air Force in that we have from this is the most important Air Force base at the time, okay, that we have 14 crashes in just since May. I mean, it's only May. And why aren't they doing something about it? What's going on? Here's a little hint, and I ask you what kind of information we're getting. Remember, we're supposed to be in a space race. It is now May 61, and we're looking at here, Cape labor woes, delayed space shot, man says. This is in May, okay, 61. Cape Canaveral said that strikes, work slowdowns, and wishy-washy decision-making have thrown the man in space and missile programs behind 6 months. I submit that it was behind 6 months because we were behind 6 months, but they have to have an excuse for it. I already told you, Soviets are they're putting, who was the first man in space? Raise your hand if you know. Speak out. Who was the first?
Yuri Gagarin.
All right. It wasn't anybody from our country, and it wouldn't be for a long time. That's so sad, but the truth. The space race is heating up, folks. All right? And they're blaming everybody but themselves. So I'm going to read some more of that.
I question it was only 6 months.
Huh?
I question the fact that they were 6
well,
months beyond.
Well, that's right. All right, so we have McNash in charge of the Cape for Convair Astronautics. Wait a minute, Convair? With General Dynamics, what does that sound like? The military? What does that sound like? That sounds like the military-industrial complex, doesn't it? You know how much money could be funneled in and out, and you're having wars, you want wars and all that, and you've got this going on. He spoke at a hearing, interrupted by applause, when Chairman John McClellan, Democrat of Arkansas, announced the apparent success of the first U.S. manned space test shot. The subcommittee is exploring labor troubles and waste in the entire missile program and whether new laws are needed to deal with these conditions. In nearly 2 weeks of hearings, the subcommittee has heard testimony that labor unions fomented strikes on flimsy excuses to throw the projects behind schedule. What they want is get the unions out and get all this stuff secret as to funding and everything else. You don't have to deal with that. And we wonder how much money was actually funneled into the space program and how much of it went elsewhere. All right. Not long after that, May 25, 1962, what we have, Carpenter gets up there in space, but when they get him down, they don't know where he is. Carpenter was saved. He was for 40 minutes, they couldn't figure out where the man was when he landed back on Earth, okay? Now, these are the same people that some years later, 69, claimed that they could now I'm not saying they didn't go to the moon, I'm just saying, claimed that somehow they had the ability to have a craft on the moon, put in an unknown number of weight of rocks, because I wrote it all down. They don't know how much they weigh. They only have a certain amount of fuel. When you take that fuel off the ground, and at that time they had the computer capacity of what you have right now, in a little calculator today. And somehow, as this other thing is orbiting like this, and only a month earlier they had failed to have the two orbiting thing like that meet just around Earth. But this miracle is that while this is going around this way, this comes up, and without a flaw, it manages to dock with this that's going around with an unknown payload of rocks. Unfortunately, also when it was on the ground down here, it took them a while to figure out where to land. I've got it all down. I wrote it all down. They weren't sure where they're going to land. But wait a minute, if they don't know where they're going to land, how are they going to know how to calculate that this is going around? If there are so many problems, the big answer is maybe they had a lot more calculation abilities than we think, except then we have an incident where we know the computers failed altogether and they had to come in by hand on, Apollo 11? Apollo 11. Yeah, Apollo 11, the computers failed. And there are some real problems with secrecy and with what really happened that need to be looked at, not as conspiracy, but as just we don't really know, and I really don't believe everything we've been told.
Can I add something?
Of course.
Right. Is this on? It's on? Oh, good. The very last slide that I showed was my article, Saving Apollo 11. That's the real story, not quite. The official story is what you just heard from Judyth, which she didn't know about, what Captain Sam Houston came in after 30 years and told me. That's in my article that's online in the link, and you can read it. What really happened was the computers didn't fail. Mission Control in Houston communicated with the return of the mothership and told Armstrong that the landing location had been changed. The original location was pre-programmed into the computer. That's where the Screaming Eagle 250-mile-an-hour vertical hurricane was in the originally programmed landing site. So he had to be given instructions as to how to manually change the location of the splashdown in the Pacific, and he did that by just slightly changing where the craft came into the atmosphere.
Yep. So there are all kinds of versions, and what I find a little disturbing is that as we get further and further from that time, we've learned that a bunch of files and a bunch of original films and all kinds of things that were accessible. I know because when I lived in Florida and could access them, you could pull them out of the library. They're not there anymore. So why? All right, on Tuesday morning, October 23rd, 62, I say we have a kind of deplorable condition. We are told that in the space race by 62, that Russia is way ahead. Look at what they did with Sputnik, right, and all this, and they're putting up all these big satellites, and they get the man in space before we do. That they have missiles far more than we do, and there's a big missile gap to worry about. And what is Kennedy doing? He says, we need to share our technology with Russia. By the way, Kennedy was living at a very formative time in his life overseas. His father's pro-Nazi, and that's where he got some of his ideas from. But he became a warrior for peace. You can read about it in James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. This man turned from one who was inculcated almost to want war to want peace. And so he saw, he'd been in battle, he'd been harmed, he'd seen the horrible things that happened. He didn't want our people in any country, the people of the earth, to suffer. So here he's got a problem. They hated Kennedy for this, the military. Blockade of Cuba ordered. No, says, men, remember I told you that I knew about the General Curtis LeMay. I learned so much from my friend, okay, who had written, is again McKinley Cantor. McKinley Cantor kind of took me under his wing. I walked along the beach there in Sarasota with him when he was dictating on this guy, dictating the biography. He's right. He was off the top of his head. He's dictating stuff that Curtis had told him. All right, and how much LeMay hated Kennedy. So his biography didn't get very far because that didn't fly very well. But you can still find it. It did get into print. But I learned so much about Curtis LeMay, so I looked him up because, of course, I was interested because of what happened. And I know that Curtis LeMay is one of the players who was just really thrilled, and he was there when Air Force One landed. He disobeyed orders. He was not supposed to be there, but he was there to greet the coffin, and I'm sure he did it with a smile on his face. So this is Kennedy was up against, he's soft on communism. I have 1 minute left? Okay. Soft on communism. Well, I don't have that much more to do. But to tell you that if anybody, what they were up to is saying, if this space race, okay, and again, I'm saving all these things because I'm getting involved in all this stuff in a different way, but it piqued my interest. This man is soft on communism, and if we go on, he is a traitor to the United States. One of the reasons the military, and we see him at Carswell Air Force Base, that's in Fort Worth. He gets off the plane, and they inspect the Air Force. They go and walk along there, and we have film showing them shaking hands with LBJ, and some of them are refusing to shake hands with the president. You can go and see it. It's kind of disturbing. I'm going to tell you what's more disturbing. They had that banquet, and where they said, Mrs. Kennedy, everybody likes, Kennedy said of his wife, everybody's here for Jackie, not him, and she's, how pretty she looks and all that. Look at the pictures again. Everybody has a boutonniere. Who knows what a boutonniere is? Flower. All right. Well, believe it or not, the kids I was talking to once, they're so poorly educated today that they thought a boutonniere was some kind of gun or something.
That's buccaneer.
Yeah. So I said they had a boutonniere. There are only two people in the room who didn't have boutonnieres: Jackie Kennedy and the president. When they get off the plane, right here in Dallas, Love Field, Johnson still has a boutonniere on. And others do too. Jackie gets red roses. The first person to get red roses, and we now know that Earl Cavill was CIA. That has come out in 2017. We now know that. He's the mayor of Dallas. His brother, Charles Cavill, deep in the space race, second in command of the CIA, and a general, military. CIA. Fired by Kennedy. Mrs. Cavill, that is Earl Cavill, nice little girl, she hands she hands yellow roses first. What a snub! To the vice president's wife, Lady Bird. Then she goes to President Kennedy's wife, Jackie, and hands her red roses and says, "I'm sorry, they were out of yellow roses. They all went to the Trade Mart." If you believe that, casket of worms, you have a stronger stomach than I do. What are we looking at? We have, in 1958, wait a minute, where am I here? Yeah, sorry. We end up with the Vietnam War and everything like that, and what we finally have is what it's called in the Los Angeles Times, Lucifer Rising. we want to get back to our roots, and we want to get back to reality, or you can listen to the fabricated stories, or you can ask for peace. We need to fight for peace. We need to get along and stop blaming the Russians or anybody else for our problems, and we need to learn to get along. Don't blame. Look, election rigging or whatever's going on, it happens everywhere. Don't blame a whole country or a whole race or anybody. What's our job is, like in this very room, what we had earlier, is to promote peace, unity, and knowledge. So you know what's going on. Space race, what do we have today? Come here. What do we have now? What just happened?
August of 2019, announced as last year, we have the U.S. Space Force. It is a branch off the U.S. Air Force. The Air Force protects the area the planes can fly. The next level of defense and protection for our liberties is the Space Force, to be able to counteract direct energy weapons, laser weapons, and electronic magnetic pulses.
Oh, you want to hand that to you?
The problem. Oh, I'm Dr. Warwick. I'm from Gainesville, Florida.
So they can hear you.
I'm Dr. Warwick. I'm from Gainesville, Florida, where Judyth went to school and my wife went to school. The problem with this Space Force is we have to get the lift rockets from Russia. We've paid them $4 billion to get to the space station, and we're going to keep on paying them because it's going to be several years before we get the ability to send people up.
It turned out during Kennedy's time that the huge missile gap between us and the Soviet Union was a lie. We so overwhelmed them, it was ridiculous. The space race itself, and when we talk about going to the moon, that's what Kennedy was trying to really, I see, unify us to work together to go to the moon. Well, no, we can't have that. We've got to get there first. And I'm telling you right now, we need to get there together. That's all I have to say.
Bravo.
Ladies and gentlemen, Judyth Baker and Barbara Honegger. Did you enjoy that?